of the friends of Saddleworth Hydro. So welcome to Saddleworth ecoEvents. Tonight is the first in the second series of ecoEvents that we're organising that will explore how local people are helping look after our environment. Our guest speaker is Jonathan Atkinson, one of the co-founders of Carbon Co-op. Can you hear me, Alison? I don't know why I'm not. All right. One of the co-founders of Carbon Co-op, a cooperative which aims to help individuals and communities make reductions in home carbon emission. He will also address some of the very many questions that have arisen from last week's launch of the Green Homes Voucher Scheme. So if you have any questions, you'll be able to put them later on in the session. But also there's a chat button at the bottom of the screen, so you can always post them as we go along. Right, I think possibly I've mentioned everything. Dave will correct me if I'm wrong. So Jonathan, over to you.
Yeah, hi there. Yeah, I'm Jonathan. I live just over the way in Glossop, but I know Saddleworth really well. I come out cycling. I've got a lot of friends in Saddleworth. I know Bill Edwards from the Saddleworth Hydro and a few other people involved in different community things. And also Richard Darlington is like, I think he's maybe member number 2 or 3 of Carbon Co-op. And we've been going now for 10 years, or 10 years next year. So yeah, so I know a few people, I know the area really well. Yeah, thank you for asking me along. I've got a presentation to share, which hopefully people can see. So what I was thinking to do was to just give a short introduction to retrofit and energy efficiency, and some of the things to look out for, and then a bit about Carbon Co-op, and then questions around the Green Homes Grants thing. Yeah, and yeah, happy to take questions as we go as well. So the aim is to kind of, yeah, talk about retrofit, understand Carbon Co-op a bit more as well. I mean, for us, Carbon Co-op, we started, as I say, more than 10 years ago now, and our main kind of driving impetus has always been around climate change and thinking about how housing and our housing, places where we live, fits into that really. We all know that there's a huge amount of energy that's used to power our homes and importantly to heat them as well. And if we can make big reductions in that, we can really start to tackle climate change anyway. We're a membership organisation, so we have over 250 members all over Greater Manchester. There are some videos here where you can meet the members and hear about them and their stories, how they've tackled retrofit in their own homes and how they've set about that. But yeah, mostly around Greater Manchester, but some further afield as well. Yeah, and people join, they pay £35 a year, they join to be part of a collective effort to tackle climate change and to get help and advice, to join a kind of like-minded people doing similar things. So retrofit, a lot of people might have heard about retrofit. That's retrospectively fitting energy improvements to our homes. Our homes, unfortunately, are some of the poorest performing energy-wise in Europe. And we have 27 million homes, something like that. And around 80% of those will be here in 2050 and beyond. So if we're going to quickly decarbonise and transition to a low carbon future, we need to address our homes, almost all our homes. We can't just knock them down and start again. There's so much embedded carbon in that process, we don't want to lose that. So yeah, but one thing I want to kind of get across is that retrofit is totally possible. People are doing it. People are doing it around Greater Manchester now. Maybe not in the numbers we need them to meet our targets, but it is happening and people can do it. People can get involved. What do we mean by retrofit, or what are the different measures we might talk about? This is internal wall insulation, taking away the plaster from inside a wall, adding insulation and plastering over it again. And that's a different type of internal wall insulation. IWI, some people call it. External wall insulation, often a lot easier to do because you can access walls a lot easier. You don't have to hack all the plaster off. You do have to move things around. On this photo, the blue is expanded polystyrene that goes in the footings, and above that we add in this case, wood fibre insulation, quite thick boards, and that has a real big impact. And that's what it looks like afterwards. You render it different colours. It can be tastefully blended in, obviously, with heritage properties or stone-built properties. You might need to do more internal wall insulation to get the same effect. You can see solar panels on there as well. That's part of a retrofit mix. Yeah, windows. These are triple glazed windows. We source most of ours from the Green Building Store over the way in West Yorkshire. Really high quality, timber framed, last a hell of a long time if they're maintained. Heat pumps. People might have heard about heat pumps. There's a lot of buzz about them at the moment. Work like a reverse fridge, compressing the air, extracting the heat with a small electric fan, extracting the heat. Storing it in a water tank, so it's a lower temperature than a gas boiler, but it can be as effective if done right. They're not always done right, but yeah, if done right, you can get really good effects. These are some installations in Ireland, really popular in Ireland. And ventilation as well. Whenever you're kind of making big reductions to your energy use and sealing up gaps and insulating things, you need to think about ventilation, because otherwise the air quality is going to get quite poor because you've sealed all the gaps in, and you want to just manage that. So there's different types of ventilation, fans, even mechanical heat recovery units, that sort of thing. And it really produces results which can have a huge impact. It's a scheme that we did in 2016 now, and it was a number of properties all around Greater Manchester, just more than a dozen, and saved around half the amount of gas people were using, reduced the carbon emissions associated with that by about 60%, saved around nearly £1,000 a year on energy bills, and people were left with average energy bills of £280 a year. That's taken into account feed-in tariff from the panels, which wasn't a high rate, it was slightly lower. But yeah, it can have a huge effect. But also on the other side, you know, we're talking about relatively large amounts of money to invest in properties to bring about these kind of impacts. The average cost for these kind of properties was around £40,000. You can still have big impacts with less money, and we've got the grant scheme as well to help people kind of make it add up. But yeah, if we're thinking long term, we might achieve that in one big go or a number of stages. That's the kind of scale that we're talking about. And it has real results inside. Here's a graph of temperature inside, like in the living room of one home over the course of a day. And what you can see is the red line afterwards. The temperatures don't go as low basically during the night. So the house cools down slower and it warms up quicker than it did beforehand. And you also see effects in the summer as well. So you don't get so much overheating where we have those particularly hot spells. You know, has an insulative effect both ways. This is the course of someone's gas use, one of our members, over the course of just 12 years. And you can see over time it reducing and then dropping off a cliff at the end. And they made incremental measures, improvements, little bit by little over time. Some internal wall insulation and loft conversion, some radiator valves that can manage the heating better, put secondary glazing, that's like an additional layer of glazing behind maybe stained glass or something like that in their front door. And then they had a carbon coat retrofit, a big bang as well. And they saved as much in that one go, that big bit of work at the end, as they had done in the previous 10 years. So there's different approaches. You can do things little by little over time. plan it out, or go for one big bang, or mix the two. But the thing that we advocate is having a plan, so knowing where you're going, so you're working towards that. So things to consider if you're thinking about going down this route, whether that be just through your own steam, or with a contractor, with someone like Carbon Co-op, or with a Green Homes Grant people. Thinking about your brief, thinking about your budget, and thinking how you're going to get the work done. So I'm going to explore those three areas in brief, really. So your brief, what is your brief? Your brief is just, it's a simple bit of paper or a file in a computer that just says, this is what I want to achieve with my retrofit. And you might think sometimes it's obvious. Unfortunately, when you get down to building, when you get down to involving other people like architects, or even people in your own home that you live with, sometimes people's ideas of what they thought they were going to do are different. So writing down a brief, putting things in writing, that's the way really to make things clear, both within your home and to people that you bring in as well. And one of the key things really is about priorities. Why are you doing this? What's your motivation, and what do you want to get out of it at the end? Again, you might think, well, it doesn't matter, does it? Because there's one way to retrofit a house. Well, actually, there's not. There's different ways to approach it, different choices to be made. And if you understand why you're getting it done, what your priorities are, that dictates the route you go down. Here, we've got quite a typical set of motivations from the householders we work with, our members, which is primarily people who are interested in saving carbon and doing something for the environment. Secondarily, about improving the comfort of their home. And third, around saving a bit of money. And sometimes people think it, especially when we talk to people in government, they think it's all about money, has to be cost neutral and cost nothing and pay back in a 5-year period. That's actually not really the way people look at improving their homes. They look at it as an investment, about doing something to improve the quality of the home or the value of the home. Yeah. So depending on what your priorities are, because you may well have different priorities, and that's totally fine, how you approach the works might be different. And this gives you a little bit of an idea. If you're just about carbon, you might choose a heat pump. You might go for air tightness work, insulation. If you were thinking about comfort, maybe you would prioritise some windows, because the impact of triple glazed or even very good quality double glazed windows is immense on like reducing drafts and that sort of thing. If you're just about money and you have an old boiler, then the first thing you should do is fit a new boiler, because it can make a real impact on the money side of things. If you're modernising and you're thinking about that sort of stuff, maybe it's about PVs on the roof. And if it's air quality and you particularly want to improve the quality of the air in your house, maybe you're highlighting, you're bumping up ventilation as a key thing. So what you go for first, the order you go for them in, depends on your priorities. You might also have other combined projects. Here is a householder that retrofit their home, but also refurbish their kitchen at the same time. So they're able to fold in the works and involve some of the same kind of contractors to mix the work between the retrofit and the refurb of the house. Also, thinking about what your values are, it might be that you particularly want local and natural materials, that you want high tech, the latest gizmos and gadgets. Might be that you want things that look a particular style, or it might be that it's about building biology and about the health of your building and using non-toxic materials. So getting that straight is, again, when it comes to builders quoting, if you're really clear that no, I want everything to be wood fibre and natural, then it's clear to everyone. Budget. So you've nailed your brief, you know what you want. Yeah, what's your budget? Is it a fixed budget? Because if it is, it's important to tell people. And it's important to be realistic as well about what you can achieve with a budget, and to have contingencies in place, particularly with refurbishment and retrofit. You're uncovering, old bits of buildings that may or may not be in the best shape that they always were. Might be that there's bits of rot or damp in there, some hidden surprises that you can do your best to try and severe house, but there'll always be things that escape attention, especially in older houses. Do you need a financial return? Are you borrowing money? Are you needing to pay it back over a certain period of time? It's important to have that down. And is funding involved? And things like the Green Homes Grant, you might say, okay, that grant will enable me to do a bit more, or maybe to enable me to do something, but beware, because often funding comes with strings attached about the types of people you work with, about the types of products you've got to use. And there might be things like forms involved and bureaucracy. So that's all thinking about budget and money. This is another thing about when you're approaching the work. People might have seen this from things like project management and things, but there's an inevitable balancing act in carrying out a retrofit between cheap, good and fast. It might be, ideally, we might like to do a good quality retrofit that happens really fast and to our time scale and is super cheap and affordable. That would be lovely, but unfortunately will never happen. Unfortunately, that's not going to happen. So there's some sort of trade-offs involved, and it's important to be clear with yourself and with the people you're working with about what those are. It might be that you want to do something good, but money's an issue and you need to keep it affordable. And that might mean that things happen a bit slower because you can't pay for all the expertise. You might need to learn stuff yourself, and that's fine, but as long as you're clear about it. It might be that you want to make sure it's good quality, but you want it to happen quickly and you want to get it done. But that means there's a premium in terms of cost. And it might be that you need it to be done quick and it's got to be cheap, but unfortunately that might mean that the quality suffers. So being clear about where your trade-offs are. Often what we do with a form like this is we ask people to put themselves on here. Where are you? Where do you want to be? And that's good because it creates a conversation around that. And quality is very important when you're spending, well, anything really on your home, because you don't want to be damaging it and you don't want to be damaging the internal environment. And that is possible if you're doing large scale works. These are some particularly bad examples of external wall insulation. You can see the doors on the left-hand side that, so rather than insulate them, they've just cut them out quite crudely and left them blank. And you think, oh well, that's fair enough. Also, you can see the brick wall in between as well. That's been left blank. You might think that's fine, but actually, what that does, it creates a gap in the insulation, which means the wall in that area is colder than the rest of the wall. What that means is water vapor in the air from breathing out or cooking or drying clothes potentially condenses in that area, and you get mold on the other side, and you get problems with the brickwork as well. Similar kind of issues on the right hand side. Not wanting to scare people into not doing this, it can all be mitigated, this kind of risk, by just taking time and care and making sure you employ the right people to do the work. It's when work is done quick and cheap that these kind of things emerge. So how are you going to procure the work? That's important to think about as well. Might be like the project in the middle. They procured it all as one big project. They employed a lead contractor who worked with them, who did everything. And they did, but it might be that you want to create packages. You might want to do some improvements at first and then move on to others. And that's another way to tackle things. Who's going to do the work? You could do it yourself. You could do some bits yourself. If you get the right training or you get the right skills, there's loads of courses out there to learn different bits of this. It might be that you use mainstream contractors, people that operate within Saddleworth or within Oldham or Greater Manchester, or Glossop even, or Tameside. There are contractors out there that could lend their hands to this sort of thing. Or there are specialist contractors, people that specialise in specific bits of retrofit, maybe a kind of general builders, or they work in specific areas. Yeah, so there's different options there, and obviously mix and match as well. Think about something like external wall insulation. You might maybe bring in a specialist contractor to do that. You might get a mainstream contractor to do some work on your loft, and you might do some air tightness work and sealing of gaps yourself, you know, so you can mix and match. And we get a lot of questions. How do we find good builders? Can you recommend good contractors? I mean, it's such a complex area, and contracting often changes, and the work changes as well. What one contractor might be good at might be not for another. But I think it's worth thinking about what the qualities of a good builder are for any job. You know, if you're going out there to get someone to do your drive or an extension, what do you look for? You know, recommendations from friends and neighbours, looking on the web, checking out their credit history, seeing if they're, you know, stable and got good record. What builders do you use already, and who might they recommend as well? And going with like local networks. We can signpost people sometimes, but like I say, such a variable area that it's hard. And there aren't many of them out there for the specialist retrofit, and we'd love to be able to credit them. We'd love to have a scheme where we check up on them every so often, but it's really costly and really time consuming, and there's so many jobs out there. We've got, like I say, more than 200 members now, so there's loads of work, you know. So yeah, that's a kind of whistle stop, like retrofit. This is what to look for. The carbon co-op, we do all kinds of things. Certainly in non-COVID times, we do site visits, home visits to people's houses, on bus tours. We do lots of training as well, classroom-based stuff. We do loads of webinar-based training now, if you're interested. Really, yeah, getting people to see what's possible, what's out there. Yes, we have a webinar program. If you go on our website, we've got an events. If you see the top right-hand corner of our website, carbon.coop, is events, and you can see all the training that's coming up on there. And on our webinar page, the links there, I'll circulate these slides so you've got them. You can see every single webinar we've recorded during lockdown, all sorts of things, everything from heat pumps to air tightness to building energy performance and all sorts of things. All totally free. People Powered Retrofit is our service that we've started around 9 months ago now. This is an end-to-end service. It's a paid-for service to help people retrofit their homes. We do everything from advice to assessment to helping people procure contractors and managing the quality on site as well. We've got a home retrofit planner, which is an assessment tool, costs around £550 for the average home. But yeah, this is the sort of thing where it gives you a really detailed idea of the kinds of things you could do in your home and the different packages of measures, and what specifically you can do. It's much, much more detailed than an energy performance certificate in EPC. Okay, so, and yeah, so have a look at our website. You're very welcome to join Carbon Co if you're interested. Now, people specifically asked about Green Homes grants, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about that now. I would say that we did an hour-and-a-half long webinar about this at the start of September, like a month ago, and we've got that plus an updated briefing on our website. The address is there. It's actually on our front page at the moment if you go to the website. But yeah, so what I'll talk about now is necessarily a kind of summary of that. But if you want more information there is guidance online, and there's the official Green Homes grant website is now live. So have a look there. That's kind of should be ultimate source of information. So some of the detail. Okay, so the grants that are available are up to £5,000 or up to £10,000 if you are in fuel poverty and in receipt of certain benefits as well. Benefits are listed on the website. Now, I'll talk a little bit about how the grants are matched in a sec. So how the grants are spent are, there are certain eligible primary measures and then certain secondary measures. The primary measures are solid wall insulation, internal and external, heat systems, heat pumps, loft top-ups, loft insulation, and there's a few others as well. So have a look. The secondary ones are things like windows and doors and floor insulation, and also ventilation is in there after we lobbied them, which is good. It's a £2 billion scheme, which sounds like a lot of money, and it's probably well, 2 billion divided by 5,000, so it's a few 100,000 properties, and it's now open on the 30th of September and it ends on the 31st, and theoretically you're meant to have the works finished by the 31st of March. Now, no one in the industry believes that deadline is going to stay, because it's impossible to imagine that the £2 billion will be spent in that period of time. So let's see. The scheme, the £5,000, slightly complicated, but you have to invest your own money, basically. You can't just get a grant and it cover all the works unless you're in fuel poverty and in receipt of those benefits. If you're not, you get 2/3 of everything you spend back again. Yeah. So if you're doing works of 7,500, which is the maximum that the grant can be claimed on, you pay 2,500, you get £5,000 in grant. Yeah. And yeah, the same if you're spending 3,000, you get 2,000 in grant, and 1,000 comes from yourself. The amount you spend on the primary measures limits what you can spend on the secondary measures. So you can't do a tiny bit of loft top up for a few £100 and then spend it all on windows. You're limited if you spend £1,000 on the loft to £1,000 on the windows, which could be quite limiting. Yeah. The details are all on the Simple Energy Advice website, the government website. I think what I would say, now that the scheme's been running like a week or so, there's a few obvious dynamics that are emerging. You have to do the legwork as a household to start with. You need to identify what you think needs to be done in your house. You've got this website, it's a very simple website. You know, it's not going to give a high quality kind of assessment of your home. You need to do a bit of the thinking about it yourself. You then need to go and get a quote from a contractor that is licensed under the scheme, has a specific kind of registration. If you don't have to go and find them, they're all on the website. If you type in your address, it'll show you which closest to yourself, to your house. What we know is that there are a very limited number of householders, contractors on this scheme. In fact, I've got a friend who's got family in Cumbria, and the nearest contractor eligible under the scheme for them is Newcastle. So, yeah. And we know that there are specific bits of work under here where there are particular skill shortages, and I would say heat pumps is one of them. We know that there's a lot of interest in heat pumps more recently as a way of getting off gas boilers, getting away from a carbon intensive fuel to a low carbon one. Yeah, there's just not enough installers, and there is the potential for corners to be cut for people to basically quote high, for example, or to get around work quicker than they maybe should to get onto other jobs. So there are a few dynamics with the scheme. It's also worth thinking very carefully about the different measures involved and which are low or high risk. Things like solid wall insulation, they're high risk, as I've kind of outlined. That's not to say you shouldn't do them, but as I kind of highlighted earlier, they're worth taking the time about, doing properly, and getting the right people in. And a scheme that has to be all done by 31st of March doesn't necessarily lend itself to kind of considered time and thinking about it. So within the sector, there are quite a lot of people concerned about the scheme, how it's going to be delivered, and that sort of thing. So that's not to say people shouldn't go for it, that there is an opportunity for people to take advantage of this. It's free money after all, why not? But there are potential implications around delays, around limited number of contractors, and a tendency for those contractors to quote high and maybe rush through jobs. So yes, that's my take on the Green Homes Grant. I'm happy to answer more questions. Just a few things where you can get involved in Carbon Co-op. Join the Co-op, look for an energy assessment, or get involved in people powered retrofit, or come to the webinars and yeah, get involved and learn all the knowledge that we're out there sharing. So yeah, that's my presentation. Thanks very much.
So you need to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I have now. Can you hear me now? Yeah. Thanks very much, Jonathan. That was so, well, felt very inspiring, and I keep looking around and thinking, where shall I start? But thank you for all that information. I think there are going to be quite a few questions. For the moment, I did have one, but it seems to have disappeared, I think, for the moment. So if we can unmute Alison, and then perhaps if anybody's got some questions, I know I have.
I can't unmute.
Right.
People have to unmute themselves.
Okay,
Yeah.
if you have a question, would you like to unmute and just put your hand up and I'll call you? Okay, shall I just start then with my question? If I wanted to do something major, which I'm, well, I don't know, possibly doing external wall insulation, what would be the first step? I imagine it's very expensive, but is it something that you could do in bits, or would it have to be the whole house?
No, you don't have to do it whole house, but it is worth having a bit of a plan. So, for example, and even if you're thinking, I might move in 5 or 10 years or whatever, thinking about like how the house might be insulated. So it might be some of the properties we've done, we've maybe insulated externally around the back at the sides, internally at the front to preserve the, you know, the look of it. So it's worth having a plan anyway for the house. In terms of, and it's worth making an assessment of the kind of improvements you want to do. Now you can do that yourself. There are home energy checklists. There are kind of advice and guides out there, or you can employ someone to assess the property for you. EPC, Energy Performance Certificate, is a very simplest kind of way to do that. Not very detailed, and I wouldn't advise it for something like external wall insulation. And there are then, you move up there, there's surveyors and assessors and what have you, you pay more money for that. You might then also employ a designer in some respect. It could be a surveyor, an architect, or someone like that. Or it might be that you go to a specialist company like a contractor, and the contractor would offer design as part of that process. Whatever way you tackle it, you need to think really carefully about the detailing. Yeah. So the example I showed before, where people are just, when it comes to a detail in the wall, they'd kind of cut some corners and not worry too much about it. So carefully detailing things, which is a design element, requires some sort of thinking and design. Those are the bits to look out for. And it's also worth thinking about materials as well. There are different types of materials you can use to insulate, everything from expanded polystyrene and kind of all kinds of like oil-based retardants and foam, to more natural things such as cork and wood fibre, and also things like rock wool, which is a type of mineral, and you know, as well as things like toxicity and kind of insulation value. So we're thinking about, you know, flammability, especially, you know, as we saw with Grenfell, about like the materials. I have to say, actually, it's one area where post Grenfell things have moved, which is about flammability and materials. There's a lot more regulation about it now.
Right,
So, yeah,
can I
there's
just
some
point out that if you keep an eye on the chat, everybody, there are some useful answers coming through.
Yes, there are.
Yeah.
I seem to have lost it again.
From
It was there,
David.
yeah.
Yeah.
From so right, it's here. Oh,
planning. So planning sometimes, so it's considered to be permitted development, external wall insulation, but the planning department sometimes interprets rules differently around Greater Manchester, around the UK. The conservation areas have an impact, the aesthetics of the property as well. So it's always worth checking it out with the planning department. You might not need planning, and sometimes they might ask you for planning, and there might be a bit of pushback from you, and you don't need planning. So yeah, there's.
Or they might ask you to do the whatever the thing is, which says I don't need planning, for which they charge you half, which is a bit of a swizz, really. I forgot what that's called.
Right, thanks. Yeah.
right. And there's some Peter's. Where's Peter?
I'm here. Yeah.
Right. You're helping your daughter. Would you like to explain the issue?
Yeah, we're doing a complete refurb. It's a 9-inch walled 1920s house, you know, the typical house. So we're doing IWI, top to bottom, every single wall. Insulation, top, bottom, middle, everywhere. New heating, new windows and doors. But what this is leading up to is we're doing the work ourselves with the assistance of a local contractor who won't be one of these licensed contractors. So can we still apply for the Green Deal grant?
No. I mean, you could do.
But I don't understand, because what it implies is that only Green Deal licensed contractors are capable of doing the work.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree. We totally agree. We've made that case to government as well. Unfortunately, they want some sort of stamp, so whatever. But for us, it excludes the smaller contractors who often do a better job. And what you find is often the smaller contractors are a bit sick of these kind of schemes. They feel like they get done over by them. They get taken advantage of. So, but having said that, you're going to invest in them. So potentially the situation is, because the bigger contractors do have the license, they're going to take longer, to get them on site. It might be better in the end. It might be cheaper in the end, actually not getting the grant and going with quality local contractors.
Yeah, well, that's a sort of lateral answer, isn't it? I mean, yes, the Green Deal scheme is to insulate your property, and not to employ Green Deal contractors. The object of the exercise is to get everybody to have a more carbon efficient home. So, I think it's a bit unfair, really, that the man in the street can't get the grant.
I totally agree, and for all the same reasons that you've given, So yeah.
Okay, thanks for that. Yeah, you've confirmed. I won't bother filling in the application form then.
Damon, I think you had something to mention on that. Every time right, let's just see if I can get your right. So, Damon, you said
yes. Hello.
You did your internal wall insulation stages.
Yeah.
How did that work out?
It's fine. We did with timber frame house, so we couldn't do things like, and we're overhanging a path at one end and we're a terrace, so external wasn't going to work. So we did, and we're in London, so London stuff is expensive. So we did a space therm aerogel internally, and so we first did the living room. And then we successively worked around the house as we refurbed the kitchen, just as in the example there from Jonathan. When we refurbed the kitchen, we brought that all up to standard. We brought our glazing up to triple glazing and so on. So we've done it over a series of years, and it's been relatively fine. You are at points camping out in the living room, can't use the kitchen, but that's always going to happen, right? but we never had to leave the house, right? We've done all the work around us. I'll type my website in where I've done all this in gruesome detail, and you can see all the pictures and all the pricing and stuff that's there.
Can I ask, have you noticed big savings because of it?
Yeah, we got to be a super home. We're about a third of the gas and electricity use, half to a third of a typical house around us. So our full bill, and that's going to ecotricity, so it's not the cheapest, is 500 and something a year for everything. 4 of us.
Yeah.
Right. What is Trustmark on your question? You said Trustmark is required.
So, Jonathan, have I got it right? The trust. Yeah, that's the Trustmark scheme. I forgot. We did speak to we've got a product which became eligible for this on the 30th of September, so we were quite keen to work out how it all worked for us. And yeah, whatever it is, Trustmark. Jonathan, that's the right name of the thing?
Yeah. It's a government-backed scheme for contractors that they sign up to. They've got to go through a registration process, and depending on what they do, say it's heat pumps or something, they might have like additional levels of things to do. There's also a quality standard called PAS 2030, but again, just as Peter said, it tends towards these kind of larger scale contractors. There are different ways to manage quality, and I think we know that the governments tend to bureaucratise that process. Not to say that small contractors can't also, there aren't cowboys out there, but there are different ways to assess that kind of quality, especially if you've got a local contractor that you know, or you've had a recommendation, then
well, as you know, Jonathan, because you were obviously in those meetings, that Bayes has been making it up as they go along. So that was probably their best guess, right?
Yes. I don't know, you weren't here, but Bayes heard about it on the day that the Chancellor announced
Yeah, you said, yeah. Well, we just joined, my company does these Radbot things, which is a retrofit thing. We joined the SCA or whatever it is, and, the first thing that comes through is, we have no idea what's happening. Exactly that, Bayes said, we've no idea. We'll go and work it out. We'll come back to you in a week. And so, and we talked to the CEO of Trustmark, and they had no idea what was going on either.
It's a question about gas boilers and the phase out. So there's been various bits of talk about gas boilers and phasing them out over time, especially like housing associations as well, making commitments and what have you. To my knowledge, there's not a firm date at the moment. I was just having a quick look online to confirm that. It's not like electric vehicles where there's a date, that people are saying this date, that's going to happen.
I think, hasn't there been something saying no new ones after 2025 or something like that?
Well, that's on new properties.
Yeah.
Not on retrofit.
That's unfortunate. If your boiler breaks down and you have to replace the boiler, then you've spent a lot of money on a boiler, and if you have to basically keep for a few years, otherwise it's not going to pay for itself. So
well, so there isn't a moratorium on new gas boilers in current houses. There's lots of people calling for it, and there's lots of sort of noises about it, but there isn't at the moment. They're basically, to give you a bit of a background into the discussions, there's a bit of jostling, let's say, at policy level between some people that advocate heat pumps, like massive, large-scale heat pumps, which basically can run on electricity rather than gas. And then there's another quite sort of small but vocal lobby calling for hydrogen to replace gas and hydrogen boilers. And it's one of those where a few years ago there was all this talk about nuclear power stations and, should we or shouldn't we? And that debate's kind of settled now and people are moving on. But at the moment in the gas area, certainly heat pumps or hydrogen is much debated. So there isn't necessarily a kind of everyone must get rid of them by this date and we'll have these or nothing else, because to fit heat pumps, it's a different technology, it's a different approach to how you heat at home, but also there's a requirement to do an element of retrofit to start with. You can't really use a heat pump to heat a traditional leaky house that loses lots of heat, you know. So there will be more work required in that area. So yeah, not at the moment. And whilst we would advocate people definitely exploring low carbon alternatives, if your heating breaks and it's the middle of winter and you've got no heating, then I could quite understand why people want to replace like for like.
I think we need to be quite clear too that most of our electricity still comes from gas and other fossil fuels. That whatever Boris says, we're not going to be wind powered, you know, very soon. Well, maybe he is, but politics. So you know, you're then balancing the amount of gas that's burnt to generate the electricity as part of the mix, and the losses that come in transmission against the efficiencies that you have from either hydrogen is also come from electrolysis, which is again you know, from gas powered primarily. So it's not a straightforward thing that's going straight to electric. The same applies to cars as well, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Well, I think the case is problem because it's probably about 6 times less efficient than using heat pumps. But I think there's something being done that burning gas in a power station, shipping across the national grid and converting it back to heat, as it were, at your end with a heat pump is still better than burning gas locally by a fairly clear margin. So even if we were purely gas powered on the grid, it would still be a win. But at this moment, we're 40% zero carbon powered, for example. So it's a definite win.
Thank you.
And did you have a question about whether the grants were available for community or private dwellings, Alison?
Yeah.
Private,
oh, you answered that, right? Sorry, right. Okay.
Yeah, but landlords are allowed to apply, aren't they?
Yeah, totally. And there are some other schemes around, I believe, in the social housing as well. But yeah, that's different kind of. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Any other particular questions? So can I just ask about Carbon Co-op?
Yes.
The membership.
Yes.
How does that? Well, what does it cost, and what benefits are there?
Yeah, it's £35 a year, and in terms of the benefits, we've got different offers, being able to borrow heat cameras, for example. We do different offers as well, like 5% off triple glazed windows and things like that. And if you're a member, you can get that discount. And yeah, we have a whole arm of Carbon Co-op now, which is around sort of smart energy and energy systems, like such as electric vehicle chargers and solar PV that diverts into hot water tanks and all this sort of thing. And we've got different projects that we run, and we can incentivize people to get involved. So it's all sorts of different ways, but you're joining a group that's kind of working towards practical solutions to retrofit and to climate change. We're also really, really keen to work with other local groups, especially, you know, things like generation, whether it be kind of, you know, water turbines or PVs or community renewables, basically. And working with a couple of groups at the moment doing that sort of thing. So, yeah, there's lots of different ways to get involved, basically.
All right, thank you.
Can I just say that we've recorded this and it will be available on our Facebook page and on our website eventually when I've edited out some of the stuff at the beginning. And I believe, Jonathan, you're going to let us have a copy of the slides so that, again,
excellent.
They can go on to the Saddleworth Hydro website.
Right, well, thank you very much. I think it's about time to finish. I think I feel amongst experts here, and I'm very much an amateur, I have learned an awful lot, and I'm wanting to know more, and I know a lot of people are here. A very big thank you to you, Jonathan, and it was really interesting. Hopefully we'll be able to look back at it as well. I might need to look at it a few times to take it all in.
Well, do keep in touch, and if you want to drop us an email or whatever, let us know. And like I say, I'm often in Saddleworth, like on my bike. I've got electric bike actually, so that's another big.
Chris. Yeah.
That's another big thing. I am a huge advocate for electric bikes. So yeah, hopefully in different times we'll be seeing people face to face.
Well, that would be good, wouldn't it?
Yeah.